So the story we're about to get into is, well, it's incredibly tough to talk about. But it's also a story we really need to understand. It's about a case that absolutely rocked Japan, and it brings up some huge, profound questions about justice and humanity. So today, we're going to break down the murder of Junko Furuta, a 40-day tragedy.
Now, in Japan, you won't hear the case referred to by Junko's name. The official title is the Concrete Encased High School Girl Murder Case. That name, it's so clinical and chilling, and it really points to the horrifying way her body was eventually found. It sets a very somber tone for everything we're about to unpack. Before this was a notorious case file. Before it was a headline, it was the life of a young woman, a girl with a family, friends, and a future. I think it's absolutely crucial that we remember the person at the heart of all this. So first, let's talk about who Junko was.
Junko Furuta was just 17 years old, a senior in high school, and by all accounts, she was a great kid. She was really well liked, she got good grades, just a bright spark. She was also incredibly responsible. She even had a part-time job at a plastics factory, saving up every yen she could for a graduation trip.
And she had a future all mapped out. I mean, she'd already landed a job at an electronics store for right after she graduated. And like a lot of girls her age, she had this big dream of becoming an idol singer. You know, this wasn't just a life. It was a life full of potential, full of plans and hope that was just about to begin.
Okay, now we have to get into how this all unraveled. And I need to warn you, this next part is extremely disturbing. But to really grasp the sheer scale of this crime, we have to understand what happened during those 40 days of her captivity.
So who did this? It was 4 teenagers, just boys really, aged 16 to 18. The ringleader was the oldest, 18-year-old Hiroshi Miyano. All of them were high school dropouts, and they had connections to what are called the Chinpira, basically low-ranking thugs in the Yakuza. And this wasn't their first crime, not by a long shot. They already had a pattern of theft, assault, and rape before they ever crossed paths with Junko.
Her nightmare began on November 25, 1988. She was abducted on her way home from work and held captive in a house that belonged to the parents of one of the boys. And get this, just 2 days later, they forced her to call her mother and tell her she'd run away. It was a calculated, cruel move to stop the police from ever starting a search. Over the next 40 days, the abuse escalated horrifically, especially after she made a brave attempt to escape. By late December, her injuries was so severe she literally couldn't walk. The end finally came on January 4th, 1989. She was murdered during a final, brutal 2-hour-long assault.
After she was killed, her body was hidden. This whole thing could have just vanished, become a cold case. But the truth came to light because of an almost unbelievable twist of fate.
So months go by. Then the police arrest the leader, Hiroshi Miyano, and another one of the boys for a completely different crime, the assault of another young woman. And during the interrogation, Miyano gets it in his head that his accomplice has already ratted him out about Junko, so he just confesses. He tells the police everything, including where to find her body. The police were totally blindsided. They had no idea. They were investigating a totally separate case. Following his directions, on March 29, 1989, they recovered her remains.
The discovery of her body and the trial that followed absolutely gripped Japan. But the outcome of that trial, well, it would become just as controversial as the crime itself. It put the entire country's justice system under a microscope.
Now, because all 4 of them were technically minors under Japanese law at the time, their identities were kept secret from the public. And as you can see here, the sentences were, well, take a look. The leader, Hiroshi Miyano, eventually got 20 years. The others got way less time, with the lightest sentence coming in at just 5 to 7 years. Something else happened during the trial that's just astounding. The parents of the leader, Miyano, actually sold their house. They used the money to pay Junko's parents 50 million yen as compensation. And the defense lawyers actually used this payment in court as a reason he should get a lighter sentence.
As you can imagine, these sentences caused a massive public outcry. People were just horrified. They couldn't believe how brutal the crime was, and then to see these punishments, it felt like a slap in the face. There were calls from all over for life imprisonment or even for the death penalty.
So you have to be asking, why? Why were the sentences so light? Well, the answer really lies in this legal precedent in Japan known as the Nagayama Standard. Think of it like a checklist the courts use to decide if the death penalty is on the table. And one of the biggest items on that checklist is the number of victims. The death penalty is usually reserved for cases where more than one person has been killed.
And this slide right here really shows you how that standard played out. The same year, 1988, there was another horrific crime, the Nagoya couple murder case. That case had 2 victims. The main perpetrator there, who was 19, he got the death penalty. But in Junko's case, with 1 victim, the court stuck to the precedent. The main perpetrator got 20 years.
All right, let's talk about what happened next, the aftermath. Because the story doesn't just stop with those prison sentences. The legacy of this case is messy, and it brings up some really tough questions about rehabilitation and whether justice was ever really served at all.
What happened after these guys got out, it's pretty sobering. 3 of the 4 went right on to commit more crimes. Miyano was arrested for fraud. Joe Aguro was sent back to prison for a violent assault in 2004. And as recently as 2018, Shinji Minato was arrested for attempted murder. The 4th, Yasushi Watanabe, he died from an illness in 2021. This pattern just casts such a long, dark shadow over those original sentences, doesn't it?
You know, you can get lost in all the legal details and the criminal records, but it's the personal loss that just hits the hardest. At her funeral, her friends read a eulogy. Part of it said, "Jun-chan, welcome back. I never dreamed we would meet again like this. Rest peacefully." It's just a heartbreaking reminder of the real human life that was stolen.
There were 2 final gestures that really tried to honor her memory. On what should have been her high school graduation day, the principal called her name and gave her diploma to her parents. And that electronics company, the one where she had a job lined up, they gave her parents the company uniform she never got the chance to wear, a symbol of the future she was supposed to have.
And that really brings us to the central, unsettling question that this case leaves us wrestling with. When a justice system hands down sentences that just don't seem to fit the crime, and when the people who are convicted go on to hurt others again, it forces us to ask a really fundamental question. When justice fails to deter, what is its purpose?